My mom announced no gifts for Christmas to save money, then gave my sister's kids brand new Apple Watches right in front of my son. The look on his face broke my heart. So, I prepared a little gift of my own, a detailed portfolio of every cent I'd managed for her for years, and my official letter of resignation. They never saw it coming. This is where the story truly begins, and you won't want to miss what happens. Make sure you're subscribed to see it through to the end. We're always curious. Where in the world are you all watching from today? Let us know in the comments. The air in my mother's house was thick with the scent of pine needles and roasting turkey, a familiar comfort that usually settled deep in my bones. Christmas was the one day of the year our sprawling, complicated family felt simple again. My husband, Mark, was deep in conversation with my brother-in-law, their laughter a low, pleasant rumble in the background. My 8-year-old son, Leo, was sitting on the floor, meticulously arranging a set of wooden blocks he'd brought from home into a teetering tower, his brow furrowed in concentration. For a moment, everything felt perfect. This year was supposed to be different, financially speaking. My mother, Carol, had called a family conference back in October. She had sat us all down at her polished dining room table, her expression a careful mix of matriarchal wisdom and financial prudence. With the cost of everything going up, she had announced, her gaze sweeping over me and my older sister, Megan, I think it's best if we all agree not to do gifts this year. Let's just focus on being together. That's the real gift, isn't it? I had felt a wave of relief. As a project manager, my life was a constant juggle of deadlines and budgets. Mark and I were comfortable, but we were also saving diligently for Leo's future and a much-needed kitchen renovation. The pressure of Christmas shopping, of finding that perfect, impressive gift, was a weight I was happy to shed. Megan, whose husband had a less stable income, had nodded enthusiastically. We all agreed, no gifts, just family, food, and togetherness. Explaining it to Leo had been surprisingly easy. So Grandma Carol said we're not swapping presents this year. I told him one evening, tucking him into bed. We're just going to have a big dinner and play games. He had looked at me with his big, thoughtful brown eyes. So, no presents for me from anyone? He'd asked. And I don't have to give any? I nodded. That's the rule. He seemed to accept it with the simple logic of an 8-year-old. A rule was a rule. Now, watching him play on my mother's living room floor, I felt a surge of pride. He hadn't complained once. He was happy just to be here, surrounded by the cheerful chaos of family. After dinner, as we all settled into the comfortable post-feast haze, my mom clapped her hands together. Well, she said, her voice bright and a little too loud. Even though we agreed on no gifts, I couldn't resist getting a little something for the grandkids. A small, cold knot formed in my stomach. I glanced at Leo, who had looked up from his blocks, his eyes wide with a flicker of hope. I offered him a small, reassuring smile, assuming my mother meant some token gesture, a book, perhaps, or a shared board game. Megan's 2 children, 12-year-old Chloe and 10-year-old Ben, immediately scrambled over to their grandmother. Carol beamed, pulling 2 sleek, perfectly wrapped white boxes from a bag tucked beside her armchair. Now, these are just a little something to help you 2 stay organized for school next year, she said, handing a box to each of them. The moment Chloe tore away the festive paper, my breath caught in my throat. It was the unmistakable, minimalist packaging of an Apple product. Ben ripped his open a second later, his gasp echoing his sister's. An Apple Watch? Grandma, you shouldn't have, Chloe squealed, but her eyes were glued to the device. I watched, frozen, as my sister helped her kids peel the protective plastic from the screens. They were the latest models, sleek and gleaming under the warm lights of the Christmas tree. The room filled with excited chatter about apps and watch faces. And then I looked at Leo. He was still sitting on the floor, his block tower forgotten. His small hands were resting in his lap, and his face, which had been bright with anticipation just moments before, had crumpled. His lower lip trembled, and his eyes were fixed on the shiny new gadgets his cousins were comparing. He didn't say a word. He didn't have to. The silence from his small corner of the room was louder than all the excited noise. He looked from the watches to my face, his expression a devastating mix of confusion and hurt. His eyes asked the question he was too well-behaved to speak aloud. Why not me? I felt Mark's hand on my shoulder, his grip firm and grounding. I turned to my mother, who was basking in her grandchildren's adoration, seemingly oblivious to the heartbreak she had just caused. "Mom," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "We agreed, no gifts." She finally turned to me, her smile faltering slightly. "Oh, Alina, don't be so sensitive," she said, waving a dismissive hand. "It's just a little something. It hardly counts." It hardly counts. The words hung in the air, sharp and painful. I looked from my mother's placating smile to my sister's feigned ignorance, then back to my son, who was now trying very hard not to cry. In that moment, the expensive watches, the broken agreement, none of it mattered as much as the blatant, casual cruelty of the favoritism. The betrayal was so much worse than a broken rule. The car ride home was a study in suffocating silence. The festive lights of the neighborhood blurred past the windows, mocking the cold, heavy atmosphere inside our car. Leo was buckled in the back, his face turned towards the window, his small shoulders slumped. He hadn't said a word since we left my mother's house, a quiet so profound it felt like a scream. Mark drove, his knuckles white on the steering wheel, his jaw tight with a fury he was holding back for my sake. Once we were inside, the pretense of a happy Christmas shattered completely. Leo finally let the tears come, silent at first, then building into heartbreaking sobs that shook his entire body. I knelt and wrapped my arms around him, pulling him into a hug so tight I hoped it could somehow absorb his pain. "Why didn't Grandma get me one?" he whispered into my shoulder, his voice thick with tears. Was I bad? The question was a physical blow. "No, sweetie, oh no," I murmured, stroking his hair. "You were not bad, you are the best boy. This has nothing to do with you. This is grown-up stuff. It's complicated." How could I explain it to him? How could I tell my sweet, innocent son that his own grandmother played favorites? That she could be so thoughtless, so carelessly cruel? Mark's voice was low and strained when he spoke. "I'll never understand her, Alina. To do that in front of him, to deliberately exclude him. What was she thinking?" I had no answer. After we finally got Leo settled into bed, his tear-stained face peaceful in sleep, I collapsed onto the sofa. The beautiful Christmas tree in our living room, which had seemed so cheerful just that morning, now felt like an accusation. Mark sat beside me, taking my hand. "You can't let this go," he said, his voice firm. "This isn't just about a gift. This is about Leo. She has to understand what she did." He was right. I couldn't let it slide. Swallowing my pride and my anger, I picked up my phone and called my mother. She answered on the second ring, her voice still bubbly from her evening. "Alina, is everything all right? You all left in such a hurry." I took a deep breath. "No, Mom, everything is not all right. Leo is heartbroken." There was a pause. "Oh, for heaven's sake," she sighed, her tone shifting from cheerful to annoyed. "Are you still on about that? I told you it wasn't a big deal. They were on sale." "On sale?" I repeated, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. "They're hundreds of dollars, Mom, but that's not the point. The point is you made a rule and you broke it for Megan's kids, but not for mine. You left Leo out on Christmas Day, and he thinks it's because he did something wrong." "Well, he's too sensitive, just like you," she snapped. "Megan's kids are older. They need things like that for school. Leo has plenty of toys." Her words were a masterclass in deflection and gaslighting. She twisted my legitimate hurt into a personal failing. I was too sensitive. She invented a justification. They needed them for school. She minimized my son's feelings. He already had enough. It was a familiar dance, one she had been leading for my entire life. Megan was the one who needed more help, more attention, more everything. I was Alina, the responsible one, the project manager who had her life together and therefore needed nothing. "That doesn't make it okay, Mom," I said, my voice trembling with a mixture of rage and sorrow. "You hurt your grandson." "Well, I'm sorry if his feelings are hurt, but this is a massive overreaction," she said coolly. "I'm not going to apologize for giving my grandchildren a nice gift. I'll talk to you when you've calmed down." And then she hung up. I stared at my phone, the dial tone buzzing in my ear. She would never get it. She would never see the damage she caused because she refused to look. To her, this was a minor spat, an overreaction she could wait out. She expected me to swallow my hurt, to smooth things over for the sake of family harmony, just as I always had. I was the reliable one, the steady one, the one who managed everything behind the scenes without complaint. She relied on that. She relied on me. A cold, clear thought cut through the fog of my emotions. For years, I had managed more than just my own life. Since my father passed away, I had managed her entire world. I paid her bills, balanced her portfolio, and made sure her comfortable, carefree lifestyle continued without a single hitch. She took it all for granted, just as she took my feelings for granted. The no gifts rule wasn't just about saving money for us. It was a directive from her, based on the financial plans I had carefully laid out for her. The irony was staggering. Mark watched me, his expression concerned. "What is it?" I looked at him, a new, steely resolve hardening within me. The hurt was still there, but it was now being forged into something else, something stronger. "She thinks I'm just being sensitive," I said quietly. "She thinks I'll just get over it." I let out a short, humorless laugh. But my mother had forgotten one crucial thing. She had forgotten who held the keys to her kingdom. My father was the heart of our family, but I was his little apprentice. He was an accountant, a man who found a quiet beauty in numbers and order. While my sister Megan was outside playing, I was often inside with him, perched on a stool in his home office. He taught me how to balance a checkbook when I was 10, how to read a stock ticker when I was 15, and how to create a long-term financial plan before I even graduated high school. "Numbers tell a story, Ellie Belly," he used to say, tapping a ledger with his pen. "You just have to learn how to listen." When he passed away from a sudden heart attack 7 years ago, our family's world fractured. My mother, Carol, who had always relied on him for everything, was completely lost. In the whirlwind of grief and paperwork, it quickly became apparent that she didn't know the first thing about their finances. She didn't know how their mortgage was paid, where the investment statements were, or even how to access their main bank account. Megan, who had just had her second child, was overwhelmed and, frankly, never had the patience for details. So, the responsibility fell to me. It wasn't even a question. I was the project manager. I was the one who knew how to listen to the numbers. In the beginning, it was an act of love, a way of honoring my father's memory. I spent weeks sorting through a mountain of disorganized files, creating spreadsheets, and consolidating accounts. I discovered that while my father had been a good earner, he hadn't been the most meticulous planner in his later years. My mother's financial situation was precarious. Her spending habits, which had been supported by his steady income, were no longer sustainable on her widow's pension and their modest savings. So I stepped in. I wasn't just an advisor. I became her unpaid financial manager, her bookkeeper, her investment strategist. I set up automatic payments for all her bills. I rebalanced her investment portfolio, moving funds from high-risk stocks to safer, more stable bonds. I created a detailed monthly budget for her, showing her exactly where her money was going and where she needed to cut back. I spent countless late nights at my own kitchen table, long after Leo and Mark were asleep, poring over her statements, making sure her world remained stable and secure. My mother was effusively grateful at first. "Oh, Alina, what would I do without you?" she would say, patting my hand. "You have your father's head for numbers. It's such a gift." But over the years, her gratitude slowly curdled into expectation. My work became invisible, a utility she was entitled to, like electricity or running water. She never saw the hours I put in. She only saw the result, a life that continued uninterrupted. She still went on her yearly cruises, bought new outfits for every occasion, and hosted lavish holiday dinners. When she wanted a new car, she didn't check her bank account. She called me and asked, "Can I afford it?" I would run the numbers, juggle the budgets, and find a way to make it happen. Megan, for her part, remained blissfully ignorant. She saw her mother's comfortable lifestyle and assumed everything was fine. "Mom seems to be doing great," she'd say. "It's amazing how well she's managing." The irony was a bitter pill I had to swallow in silence. The no gifts rule for Christmas had been my idea, presented to my mother as her own. During our quarterly financial review in September, I had shown her the projections. "Mom, if you want to take that trip to see the gardens in South Carolina next spring, you need to cut back on non-essential spending for the next few months," I had explained, pointing to her holiday spending from the previous year. A good place to start would be Christmas gifts. She had readily agreed, seeing it as a minor sacrifice for a bigger prize. And when she announced it to the family, she presented it as her own financially savvy decision, a wise matriarch leading her family through tough times. I didn't mind. The goal was to protect her finances, not to get credit. But seeing those Apple Watches, knowing she had gone behind my back and disregarded the very plan designed to keep her solvent, was more than just a personal slight. It was a complete repudiation of the years of work I had poured into her life. She had taken my careful, painstaking labor and used the financial freedom it provided to play favorites with her grandchildren, creating a spectacle of exclusion and hurt. Her polished, put-together appearance was a facade I had single-handedly maintained. Underneath the perfectly coiffed hair and expensive cashmere sweaters was a woman whose financial literacy was non-existent, a woman who would be in serious debt if not for my constant, silent intervention. And she had used the stability I provided to hurt my child. That was the one thing I could not, and would not, forgive. The 2 weeks following Christmas were a Cold War fought in text messages and unanswered phone calls. My mother sent a string of messages, starting with a curt, "I hope you're over your little tantrum," and progressing to guilt-laden texts about how lonely she was and how she didn't understand what she'd done wrong. I ignored them all. The raw wound of Leo's tears was still too fresh, and I knew that any conversation would devolve into her usual cycle of denial and blame. During this time, Mark was my rock. One evening, as I was loading the dishwasher, he came up behind me and gently took the plate from my hands. "You can't keep this up, Elle," he said softly. "Ignoring her isn't a solution. It's a holding pattern. She's waiting for you to cave." "I know," I sighed, leaning back against him. "But if I talk to her, I'll just end up yelling, and then I'll be the emotional one who's making things difficult. I've played this game my whole life, Mark. I don't know how to win." "Then change the game," he said, his voice firm. "You're a project manager. You deal with difficult people and complex problems for a living. You strategize. You don't let a difficult client walk all over you, so why are you letting her?" His words hit me like a splash of cold water. He was right. At work, I was respected. I was decisive. I managed multi-million-dollar projects, and I did it by being prepared, by having the data to back up my decisions. I never walked into a negotiation unprepared. Yet in my personal life, with my own mother, I had allowed myself to be relegated to the role of the dutiful, emotional daughter. That night, a new resolve settled over me. Mark's words echoed in my mind, "Change the game." My mother saw me as her daughter, someone she could manipulate with emotional leverage. It was time to force her to see me as I was, her highly competent and now former financial manager. My clever trap wouldn't be an emotional outburst, it would be a professional presentation. My leverage wasn't hurt feelings, it was cold, hard data. My investigation began not with a private investigator, but with a deep dive into my own computer. For the next week, I dedicated my evenings to a new project, the Carroll portfolio. I exhumed 7 years of financial records. I pulled every bank statement, every credit card bill, every investment report, and every tax return I had ever filed for her. I created charts and graphs that visualized her spending habits, her income versus her expenses, and the growth of her portfolio under my management. The numbers told a story even more stark than I had realized. I calculated the money I had saved her by refinancing her mortgage at a lower rate, over $30,000. I quantified the growth of her investments, which had outperformed the market average by 6%, a gain of nearly $60,000. I also calculated the debt she would have incurred if she had maintained the spending patterns from the year after my father died. A staggering figure that would have wiped out her savings entirely. But I didn't stop there. I also started a log. I meticulously documented the time I had spent on her affairs. The phone calls with her bank, the meetings with her insurance agent, the hours spent preparing her taxes. I estimated the value of my time based on the average hourly rate for a professional financial consultant. The final number was shocking. I had provided her with a level of service that would have cost her tens of thousands of dollars a year. As I compiled the data, my anger began to transform into a calm, focused sense of purpose. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about revealing the truth. It was about drawing a boundary so clear and so irrefutable that it could never be crossed again. I was building a case, not for a jury, but for an audience of two, my mother and my sister. I bought a high-quality leather binder and a ream of professional-grade paper. I printed every chart, every summary, every log, and organized them into tabbed sections: asset management, debt aversion, time and labor analysis. The final product was a document as thorough and professional as any I would present to a board of directors. Holding the finished portfolio in my hands, I felt a shift within myself. The hurt, sensitive daughter was gone. In her place was a project manager who had all the data on her side. The game had indeed changed, and I was finally ready to play. Just as Mark predicted, my mother's strategy shifted from guilt to manufactured normalcy. 2 weeks into my silence, she sent a group text to me and Megan. "Girls, I was thinking we should all go out for brunch on Saturday to catch up. My treat, let's plan my spring vacation." My first instinct was to refuse, but Mark stopped me. "No," he said, looking over my shoulder at the text. "This is it. This is your opening. Go and take your portfolio with you." He was right. A public setting would make it harder for her to cause a scene. It was the perfect venue for the first phase of my plan. I replied to the group text with a simple, "Sounds lovely. See you Saturday at 11. When I walked into the bustling restaurant, my mother and Megan were already seated at a corner booth. Carol waved me over, a bright, practiced smile on her face, as if the last few weeks of tension had never happened. "Elena, darling, you look wonderful," she chirped, air-kissing the space beside my cheek. Megan gave me a small, uncertain smile. The air was thick with unspoken words. We ordered, and for a while the conversation was a minefield of pleasantries. My mother talked about her garden club, and Megan recounted a funny story about her son. Ben, I kept my contributions brief and polite, waiting for my moment. It came, as I knew it would, with the arrival of our entrees. "So," my mother began, daintily dabbing her lips with a napkin, "I've been doing some thinking about my trip. I was looking at a lovely tour of the historic homes in Savannah and Charleston. Elena, I'll forward you the link. I need you to look at the costs and tell me what you think." She said it with the casual authority of a CEO assigning a task to an assistant. I took a slow sip of water, carefully placing the glass back on the table. "That's an interesting idea, Mom," I said, my voice even and calm. I reached into my tote bag and pulled out the thick leather binder, placing it on the table between us. My mother stared at it. "What's that?" "This is a preliminary financial review," I said, using my best professional tone. "I took the liberty of running some projections based on your current assets and expenditures." I opened the binder to the first tab, a colorful pie chart titled Annual Expense Distribution. "According to my analysis," I continued, tapping a large slice of the pie labeled discretionary spending, "a trip of that cost, combined with your other planned expenditures for the year, would require you to liquidate a significant portion of your income-generating assets. To put it simply, a trip like that would completely deplete your savings in about 18 months, not 6. I had exaggerated the timeline in my head before. The reality was more drawn out, but just as certain. My mother's smile froze. Her eyes darted from the chart to my face, a flicker of confusion and anger in them. "What are you talking about? Deplete my savings? That's ridiculous. Your father left me perfectly comfortable." "Dad left you a good foundation, which I have worked very hard to manage and grow," I said, flipping to the next page, a line graph showing the steady upward trend of her portfolio's value over the past 7 years. But your spending consistently outpaces your passive income. The only reason you've remained solvent is because I've been actively managing the difference. Megan was looking back and forth between us, her fork hovering over her plate. Elena, what do you mean? I mean, I said, looking directly at my sister for the first time, that Mom's lifestyle is subsidized. It's subsidized by hundreds of hours of my unpaid labor. Carol's face flushed a deep red. Now, that is an outrageous thing to say, she hissed, her voice low but sharp. I never asked you to do any of that. You offered. You're my daughter, it's what family does. I offered to help you get on your feet after Dad died. I corrected her gently but firmly. I didn't sign on to be your permanent, pro bono financial firm. And when I give you sound financial advice, like cutting back on gift giving for 1 year to save for a goal, I expect you to respect that. The mention of the Christmas gifts hit its mark. My mother recoiled as if slapped. This is what this is about? Those watches? I cannot believe you are still holding on to that. You're trying to punish me by threatening my financial security. This isn't a punishment, Mom, I said, my voice unwavering. It's a presentation of fact. The fact is, you cannot afford that trip. The fact is, you have taken my work and my advice for granted. And the biggest fact of all is that things are going to have to change. She stared at me, her mouth opening ND closing silently. For the first time in my life, she had no response, no prepackaged platitude or gaslighting phrase. She was confronted with data she couldn't dispute and a daughter she no longer recognized. The polished, agreeable facade she relied on had been replaced by a wall of calm, professional competence. The seeds of doubt had not only been planted, they had begun to sprout. The brunch ended with a stony silence. My mother paid the bill with a snap of her wrist, refusing to look at me, and left without another word. Megan lingered, her expression a jumble of confusion and concern. Elena, I had no idea, she stammered as we stood on the sidewalk. Is it really that serious? It is, I said simply. I'll call you later. Over the next few days, my mother escalated her efforts to regain control. She began with a barrage of voicemails, her tone alternating between wounded and furious. How dare you embarrass me in front of your sister? One message seethed. You've always been jealous of her, and now you're trying to turn her against me. Another, left hours later, was filled with theatrical sobs. I don't know what I've done to deserve such a cruel, ungrateful daughter. I just wanted us all to be a family. When I didn't respond, she tried to go around me, just as I had anticipated. She called Megan, attempting to paint me as a hysterical, power-hungry villain who was holding her finances hostage. But her strategy backfired. The professional, data-driven presentation at brunch had given my words a weight they'd never had before. Megan was no longer willing to accept my mother's version of reality without question. That Wednesday evening, my phone rang. It was Megan. Okay, she said, without any preamble. You need to explain everything. Mom just called me crying, saying you're trying to ruin her. What is going on? This was my chance. I took a deep breath. Meg, I'm not trying to ruin her. I'm trying to show her reality. For years, I've been protecting her from it. I invited her to come over, promising to show her everything. She arrived an hour later, looking nervous. I sat her down at my dining room table, the same table where I had spent so many nights managing my mother's affairs, and I opened up my laptop. I didn't show her the polished portfolio I had shown our mother. I showed her the raw material. I walked her through the color-coded spreadsheets, explaining what each column meant. I showed her the initial state of our mother's finances after Dad died, the disorganized accounts, the looming credit card debt, the anemic savings. Then, I showed her the work. I pulled up the folders filled with scanned documents. The mortgage refinancing application that took me weeks to complete, the correspondence with the IRS to sort out a tax issue, the detailed monthly budgets I created, and which our mother consistently ignored. The irrefutable proof wasn't some hidden secret or past crime. It was the sheer volume and complexity of the work itself. It was the undeniable evidence of my labor. Megan was silent for a long time, her eyes wide as she scanned the screen. "I don't understand half of this," she whispered, shaking her head. "I never knew." "You weren't supposed to," I said gently. Mom wanted to maintain the illusion that everything was fine, that she was managing perfectly. And I enabled her. I thought I was helping, but I was just letting her live in a fantasy. I clicked open one last file. It was a projection chart. One line in blue showed the current trajectory of her net worth with my continued active management. Another line in stark red showed what would happen if she were left to her own devices with her current spending habits. The red line dropped sharply, hitting 0 in less than 5 years. Megan gasped. "Oh my gosh, she'd be broke." "Completely," I confirmed. "And she would have no one to blame but herself. She spends money like she still has Dad's income, and she treats me like a magical money tree. The Apple Watches were just the final straw. She used the financial security I built for her to deliberately hurt my son, and she doesn't even see the hypocrisy in it." Tears welled in Megan's eyes. "Leo," she said, her voice thick with regret. "I was so embarrassed that day, Alina. I knew it was wrong, but I didn't say anything. I never want to upset Mom." "I know," I said, and for the first time in years, I felt a genuine connection with my sister, a shared understanding of the emotional tightrope we were both forced to walk. "What you're doing, it isn't cruel," Megan said, her voice gaining strength. "It's necessary. She can't keep doing this to you, to us." The spell was broken. The case was built, and now I finally had an ally. My mother's attempt to isolate me had only succeeded in uniting her daughters against her carefully constructed reality. The final confrontation was coming, and this time I wouldn't be standing alone. My mother, sensing she was losing control of the narrative, called for a final summit. "I want the whole family at my house this Sunday for dinner," she announced via a text message that was clearly a command, not an invitation. "We are going to sort this nonsense out once and for all." Megan and I exchanged a quick series of texts. "This is it," she wrote. "I'm with you." The atmosphere at my mother's house was thick with tension. She had prepared a lavish roast dinner, an armor of domestic perfection. Mark and my brother-in-law, Dave, made awkward small talk, while the kids, sensing the strange energy, played quietly in the corner. After the plates were cleared, my mother stood at the head of the table, folding her arms. "All right," she began, her voice brittle. "I think it's time we addressed Alina's recent behavior." She looked at me, her eyes cold. "Your sister tells me you've been filling her head with these wild stories about me going broke. I find it deeply hurtful that you would use my personal finances, which you were supposed to be helping with out of the goodness of your heart, as a weapon against me." This was it, the moment of truth. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't show any emotion. I simply reached into my bag and pulled out the leather portfolio once more, placing it in the center of the table. "This is not a weapon, Mom," I said calmly. "It's a report. It's the story of the last 7 years." I looked at Megan, who gave me a firm nod of encouragement. "And it's not a story about you going broke. It's a story about the immense amount of work that has gone into preventing that from happening." I stood up and opened the binder. Systematically, calmly, and with the detached authority of a project manager delivering a quarterly review, I began. I didn't address just my mother. I spoke to everyone at the table. I walked them through the initial financial chaos after Dad's death. I showed them the charts illustrating the portfolio growth. I detailed the savings from the mortgage refinance. I explained, in simple terms, the concept of unsustainable discretionary spending, pointing to the line item that included cruises, expensive clothes, and, yes, brand new Apple Watches. My mother tried to interrupt, to object, to dismiss my points. "This is private," she protested. "You have no right." "I have every right," I said, my voice cutting through her bluster. "For 7 years, this has been my unpaid second job. The stress of it, the responsibility, that was private too. The hours I spent away from my own family to manage yours, that was private. You made it my business when you made it my responsibility." I flipped to the final section, time and labor analysis. I showed them the log of my hours, the hundreds upon hundreds of hours, and then the estimated market value of that labor. The number, well into 6 figures, hung in the air, stunning the room into silence. Dave's jaw was practically on the floor. "All of this," I said, my voice softening slightly as I looked at my mother, "I did it because I love you. I did it because I wanted to honor Dad's memory and make sure you were secure. I never wanted thanks or payment. All I ever wanted was a little respect. Respect for my time, my expertise, and my family." I let my gaze drift to the spot where Leo had been sitting on Christmas Day. "When you broke our no-gifts agreement, you didn't just hurt Leo. You disrespected me and all of this work. You took the financial freedom I created for you and used it to show my son that he was worth less than his cousins. And that is a line you do not get to cross." I then slid a single, crisp sheet of paper out from the back of the binder and placed it in front of her. "Which is why this is my formal resignation," I announced. "Effective immediately, I will no longer be managing your finances. I have compiled a list of vetted, professional financial advisors. I suggest you hire one." Carol stared at the paper as if it were a snake. She was pale, speechless. All her tools, her emotional manipulation, her guilt trips, her feigned helplessness, were useless against the cold, hard weight of the truth. It was Megan who delivered the final, decisive blow. She stood up, walked around the table to stand beside me, and placed a hand on my shoulder. "She's right, Mom," Megan said, her voice clear and strong. "I've seen the numbers. I've seen the work Alina has done. I had no idea, and I am so sorry, Alina, that I let you carry this alone." She turned back to our mother. "We can't go on like this. You can't go on that trip, and you owe Alina and Leo a massive apology. Things have to change." The united front was unbreakable. My mother looked from my face to Megan's, searching for a crack in our resolve, and found none. The spell she had woven around our family for decades had finally, irrevocably been broken. In the ringing silence of her dining room, she had been publicly, quietly, and systematically exposed. Her reign was over. The weeks following that Sunday dinner were a quiet revolution. My mother's downfall wasn't loud or dramatic. It was the slow, creeping dawn of consequence. Without me to manage her accounts, she was forced to confront the reality she had so long avoided. She did, reluctantly, hire one of the financial advisors from my list. The advisor, a no-nonsense woman named Ms. Albright, promptly put her on what she tearfully described to Megan as a starvation budget. The lavish vacations were off the table. The weekly shopping trip ceased. For the first time since my father's death, my mother had to look at a price tag and ask herself, "Can I afford this?" without having me to magically make it possible. Her social life, which had been built on a foundation of casual generosity she couldn't sustain, began to shrink. Her world became smaller, quieter, and much more honest. It was a difficult adjustment, and she complained bitterly to Megan, but the new reality was non-negotiable. The most profound change, however, was in my relationship with my sister. The shared experience of confronting our mother had forged a new bond between us, one built not on childhood history, but on adult understanding. We started talking on the phone several times a week, not about our children or trivial matters, but about our shared past. We unpacked years of my mother's subtle manipulations, the ways she had pitted us against each other, Megan, the fragile one who needed more, and me, the capable one who needed nothing. One afternoon, over coffee, Megan reached across the table and took my hand. "I am so sorry, Alina," she said, her eyes filled with a sincerity that moved me to my core. "I was so caught up in my own world, I never stopped to think about the pressure you were under. I see it now. I see everything you did for us." We agreed that from now on, we would approach our mother as a team, presenting a united front so that she could never again use her divide-and-conquer tactics. My mother did eventually apologize. It wasn't the heartfelt, soul-bearing apology I might have once dreamed of. It was stiff and awkward, delivered over the phone. "I've had some time to think," she said, her voice strained. "And I suppose I may have taken your help for granted, and I am sorry about what happened at Christmas with Leo. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start, It was an acknowledgement, however small, of the truth. I accepted it, knowing that it was likely the best she was capable of. The real resolution, for me, came a few months later. Instead of a tense family vacation orchestrated by my mother, Mark, Leo, and I took our own trip. We rented a small cabin by a lake just a few hours from home. There were no fancy dinners or expensive souvenirs. There were hikes in the woods, evenings spent playing board games, and afternoons swimming in the cool, clear water. One evening, as Mark and I sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink, Leo ran up to us, his face glowing with excitement. He held out his hand, and in his palm was a perfectly smooth, heart-shaped stone he had found by the water's edge. "This is for you, Mom," he said, pressing it into my hand. "It's a gift because you're the best." I closed my fingers around the small, cool stone, my throat tight with emotion. This simple, freely given gift meant more to me than any expensive watch ever could. It was a symbol of the new life I had claimed for myself and my family, a life free from hidden obligations, unspoken resentments, and manufactured drama. Holding the stone, with my husband's arm around me and my son beaming at me, I felt a profound sense of peace. The books were balanced. The project was complete. I was finally truly free.